Los Angeles fire. What I saw in the sky before the catastrophe. The morning before everything changed, it was just another day like any other. You know how those days go. The ones that start off normal, but end up so far from normal that you can't believe you ever thought of them as routine. That's what it felt like. Woke up, brushed my teeth, kissed Sarah good morning, nothing unusual. The sun was just beginning to crawl over the hills, and the light slanted through the kitchen window. I remember the coffee was a little stronger than usual, and I thought, maybe I need to lay off the caffeine for a bit. Little did I know caffeine was the least of my problems. There was this stillness in the air, though, that day. A quietness that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Like when you're waiting for a phone call you know you're not supposed to get. The kind of quiet that makes your skin itch, but you keep telling yourself it's all in your head. The sun was bright, too bright, almost blinding. It wasn't hot, not yet, but something about that early morning light felt off. That's the best way I can describe it, off. And if I'd paid more attention, maybe I would have realized then that things were about to spiral into something far beyond anything I could have imagined. Sarah was in the kitchen, making her usual breakfast, the sound of sizzling eggs in the pan, the soft shuffle of her slippers on the floor. She looked at me over her shoulder, that little smirk of hers curling at the corner of her lips. "Mike, you know we've got that dentist appointment today, right?" she asked, like she had to remind me every time. Yeah, I remember," I muttered, a little distracted by the coffee cup in my hand. I'd been married to Sarah for 15 years, but every time she gave me that look, I knew I was in trouble. She had this way of cutting through my bullshit, you know. She could always tell when something was up with me, even if I hadn't said a word. And this time, she could tell I wasn't really paying attention. "You okay?" she asked, her tone a little softer. "Yeah, just a little tired, I guess," I replied, shaking it off. But I wasn't just tired. There was this weight in the air. Like something heavy had settled over our house, and it wasn't moving. I could feel it in my bones, this quiet tension. Emily, our daughter, was already at the table, eating her cereal. She was 9, a little spitfire of energy, always chattering about something. I can't tell you how many times I'd found myself zoning out during her endless stream of words. But that morning, I noticed the way she was staring at the window, her spoon halfway to her mouth. Her eyes were wide, and she didn't say a word. I followed her gaze, thinking maybe she was just distracted by the birds outside or some random squirrel doing its thing. But there was nothing. The trees were still. No wind. No sound. Nothing. I thought maybe it was just me. Maybe I was losing it, like those old guys who always say they feel something in the air before a storm, and you just nod and smile because you think it's nonsense. But that feeling, well, it lingered. It didn't go away. Later that afternoon, I stepped outside to check the mail, and there it was again, this strange weight in the air. I looked up at the sky, trying to see if I could make sense of it, but all I could see was the deep blue, clear as day. Nothing out of the ordinary, right? But then, that's when I saw it. A flicker. A flash of light, way up high, but not like anything I'd seen before. It wasn't like a plane, and it wasn't like lightning. It was different. I squinted, trying to focus, but the damn thing disappeared just as quickly as it appeared. I shook my head, telling myself I was seeing things. Maybe it was just a reflection or some weird optical illusion. I didn't say anything about it to Sarah because, honestly, I didn't want to sound like I was losing my mind. But when I turned around to go back inside, Emily was standing there, right next to me, eyes wide again. "Did you see that?" she asked, her voice soft. I paused. "See what, kiddo?" "The light in the sky," she said, pointing up. I looked again, but nothing. Nothing except that stupid, clear blue sky. "Nope. Don't know what you're talking about," I said, trying to brush it off, even though a part of me felt a chill run down my spine. She wasn't convinced, though. I saw the way her brow furrowed, and she pulled her jacket tighter around herself, even though it wasn't cold. Something was bothering her, and I could tell she wasn't about to drop it. "Well, I saw it," she said, shaking her head. "It was like a laser or something." "A laser?" I said with a laugh, trying to lighten the mood. "Kid, you're watching too much sci-fi." She didn't smile. She just looked at me with those serious eyes of hers. She was too young to be this serious. The whole rest of the day felt off. I tried to ignore it. I didn't want to make a big deal out of something that probably didn't mean anything, right? But as the evening wore on, I kept noticing little things that made my stomach tighten. The air, for one, felt too thick, like it was hard to breathe, but not in a way that made you choke. It was just a weight, like you were always holding your breath without realizing it. Even Sarah noticed it. That night, we had dinner, nothing fancy, just some spaghetti. We were sitting at the table, and the conversation was as normal as ever. Emily was talking about school, Sarah was telling me about a new recipe she wanted to try, and I was just half listening. It was the same old stuff, the routine that kept us sane in a world that kept getting crazier. But then, just as the sky began to darken outside, the lights returned. At first, I thought it was headlights from a car. But no, it wasn't. There was something too bright about it. Something wrong. I stood up from the table, and Sarah looked at me, confused. "Mike, what is it?" she asked, the concern creeping into her voice. "Stay here," I said, already walking toward the window. I couldn't explain why I felt so compelled to look. It was like something was pulling me, something I didn't understand. I moved closer to the glass and pressed my palm against it, watching the sky. There they were, the lights. But they weren't just lights, they were beams streaking down from the sky like they were aimed at something, like they were targeting something. I froze. I could hear Sarah's footsteps behind me, but I couldn't move. "Mike," she whispered, "what the hell is that?" I don't know how long we stood there, watching the beams. They flickered in and out of view, not like any kind of aircraft or weather phenomenon I'd ever seen. There was no sound, no rumble, nothing to explain what we were seeing. And then, just like that, they were gone. I turned to Sarah, my heart pounding in my chest. "Did you?" But before I could finish, Emily appeared in the doorway, looking just as confused and scared as I felt. She was trembling, her little fingers clutching the edge of the doorframe. "What was that, Daddy?" I didn't know how to answer. I didn't have an answer. And that was the moment I should have realized nothing was ever going to be the same again. We went to bed that night like we always did, but there was no peace in it. No calm. Just that nagging feeling that something was waiting. Something big. Something we couldn't stop. I lay there in the dark, listening to the sounds of Sarah's breathing beside me, and all I could think about was those lights in the sky. The way they seemed to be watching, waiting, like they knew what was coming next. And the worst part, I still couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just a random coincidence. That something out there was connected to the fire. Something I couldn't understand yet. But that was just the calm before the storm. I didn't know it then, but everything was about to change. The next day, things got worse. I don't know how else to put it. I tried to push it all to the back of my mind. Those lights, the weird feeling in the air, but it was like trying to ignore a splinter in your finger. At first, you tell yourself it'll be fine, but the more you move, the worse it hurts, and eventually, you have no choice but to deal with it. It was around noon when the first sign really hit me. Sarah was out back, pruning the garden like she always does. Emily was at school. And there I was, sitting at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee, trying to convince myself that everything was fine. The sky was clear again, no clouds, no storms on the horizon. But something was off. The air felt too still, like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Then I smelled it. It wasn't a pleasant smell, almost like burning rubber mixed with something sweet and metallic. At first, I thought it was just the neighbor's car engine or some damn factory down the road, but it didn't go away. It lingered, clung to the air like an unwanted guest. I got up and opened the back door to get some fresh air. Sarah glanced up from her gardening and raised an eyebrow. "Mike, what are you doing? It's too nice out to be cooped up in here all day." I didn't answer her right away. I stepped outside, sniffing the air. The smell was stronger now, and it was coming from everywhere. There was no source. Nothing to explain it. My stomach churned, but I didn't want to say anything to Sarah yet. She'd just brush it off, say I was overthinking things like she always does. I walked over to the edge of the yard, near the fence, trying to figure out where it was coming from. Maybe it was the trees. Maybe something was burning out in the woods behind our house. But no, there was nothing. Just the smell, thick and oppressive, making my head spin. "You okay, Mike?" Sarah called from the garden, her voice laced with concern. "You're looking a little pale." I didn't answer. I turned back and saw her standing there, one hand holding the shears, the other brushing her hair out of her face. I don't know why, but the sight of her just then sent a cold shiver through me. The smell was still there, but now it felt like it was wrapping itself around me, like it was sinking into my skin. I quickly went back inside, trying to ignore the nausea rising in my chest. "Maybe you should go inside for a bit, Mike," Sarah suggested, voice softening. "You look like you need to rest." I didn't feel like resting. I felt like something was closing in on me, slowly but relentlessly. But I didn't say that. Instead, I just nodded and went back to the kitchen table. My coffee was cold now, but I drank it anyway, trying to shake off that damn feeling in my gut. That afternoon, things started getting weirder. Emily came home from school, but she wasn't herself. She was quiet, way too quiet for a kid her age. Usually, she was bouncing around the house, talking about her friends, what she'd learned that day, her latest obsession with whatever toy she was into. But today, nothing. She barely spoke. "Hey kiddo," I said, trying to lighten the mood. "How was school?" "Okay," she muttered, her eyes glued to the window. "What's going on? You feeling sick?" I asked, my voice laced with concern. She shook her head, but didn't look at me. I followed her gaze out the window, and there it was again. The sky clear as ever. But something wasn't right about it. It was like it was too still, like the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. I stared at it for a moment, and then the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. "Dad," Emily whispered, her voice almost a breath. "What are those lights?" I turned around quickly, startled by her question. She was pointing toward the horizon, and sure enough, there were those damn lights again, faint at first, but getting brighter. I didn't say anything right away. I just stood there, frozen, staring at them. I wanted to tell her she was imagining things, but I couldn't. I wasn't sure what I was seeing myself. "Mike!" Sarah's voice was tight now. "What's going on?" "Sarah," I said, my voice low and shaky. I saw them again. The lights. Like last night. And Emily saw them too. She just stared at me, blinking like I'd gone mad. "Lights? Mike, you're not making any sense." "I swear to God, Sarah, I'm not crazy," I snapped. "Look out the window." She moved over to the window, peering out, and I could see the hesitation in her eyes. She wasn't ready to believe me. She'd been skeptical of my weird gut feelings before. But this time, she didn't argue. She just watched, her face slowly draining of color. Those lights, flickering in and out like they were scanning the ground. It wasn't just a random flash, it wasn't a plane. There was something deliberate about it, like something, or someone was watching us. "I don't know what to make of this," she said, her voice trembling. I didn't have an answer either. I could feel the tension in the room, thick and suffocating. I couldn't help but feel like the world around us was changing, and we were too late to stop it. Later that night, as I sat alone in the living room, I could hear the sounds of Sarah and Emily moving around upstairs. But I couldn't shake that damn sense of dread. It was like the universe had shifted, and we were no longer in control. The air felt colder, and there was a tension in the atmosphere that I couldn't explain. My mind kept racing back to the lights, the smell, and how it all seemed connected somehow. I tried to sleep, but I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those beams of light again, shining down from the sky. And the smell, it was still there. Subtle, but ever present, like it had crawled inside my lungs. I kept telling myself it was nothing. Just some strange coincidence, right? But deep down I knew. Something wasn't right. Something bigger was coming. It was around 3 a.m. when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of something heavy hitting the roof. A thud, followed by the rustling of branches. I sat up in bed, heart pounding. I wasn't sure if it was just my mind playing tricks, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had just landed on our roof. Something I couldn't explain. I didn't wake Sarah. She wouldn't believe me anyway. I lay there, staring up at the ceiling, trying to ignore the strange noises outside. And I realized something. This was no coincidence. Whatever was happening, it wasn't just random. There was something bigger at play, something out of our control. The signs were there, and I couldn't ignore them anymore. The air, the lights, the way everything felt so wrong. The storm was coming, and we weren't ready for it. That night, I couldn't sleep. No matter how hard I tried to close my eyes, my mind wouldn't shut off. My body felt exhausted, but my brain, it was wide awake, like it was waiting for something. I kept thinking about those damn lights, the strange way they flickered in the sky. The smell, the chill in the air, it all gnawed at me, refusing to let go. Around midnight, I finally gave up on sleep. I grabbed a glass of water and stared out the window, watching the night unfold. The world outside was quiet, still. Too still. The moon was high, casting shadows that seemed to move. There was something eerie about it, like nature itself was holding its breath. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. I didn't know what, but I could feel it in my gut. Then, just like that, they came back. The lights. At first, I thought it was a trick of my tired eyes, some weird reflection off the glass. But no, they were real. Bright, white beams of light slicing through the night sky. They weren't like the usual plain lights, or anything I'd seen before. These were different, laser-like, almost surgical in their precision, shining down from the heavens like they were marking something. I stood frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. They didn't flicker or fade. They were steady, almost as if they were aimed at something specific. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just some weird coincidence. These beams weren't just lights. They were targeting the ground, and I couldn't figure out why. I felt a chill sweep over me, colder than anything I'd ever felt before. My skin crawled. I should have woken Sarah, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed by this awful feeling in the pit of my stomach. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone, but when I looked at it, I realized I couldn't even think straight enough to make a call. I was in some kind of trance, unable to break free from the pull of the lights. And then, just like that, everything exploded. The sound hit first. A low rumble, almost like thunder, but deeper. More visceral. It shook the windows, rattled the walls. The whole house seemed to tremble under the weight of it. And then the smell hit, smoke. Thick, black smoke filling the air like a blanket, suffocating everything in its path. I couldn't breathe. I gasped, stumbling back from the window, my heart racing. That's when I heard the crackling sound, the unmistakable noise of fire. I didn't know where it was coming from at first. My mind was racing, but my body was still frozen. It didn't make sense. It couldn't make sense. I looked at the clock. It was just after 1 a.m. Sarah and Emily were still asleep, oblivious to what was happening. But I couldn't wake them. I couldn't even think straight. I stumbled down the stairs, feeling the heat creep up my spine. The air was thick now, heavy with smoke. I choked, my eyes watering, but I kept moving. I couldn't just stand there. I had to do something. When I reached the front door, I threw it open, and that's when it hit me. The fire was already here. It was so close, licking at the edges of the yard, crawling up the trees, spreading faster than anything I'd ever seen. The whole sky was filled with a sickly orange glow, casting everything in an unnatural light. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't prepared for this. Hell, none of us were. I ran upstairs, pounding on the door to Sarah's room, yelling her name. Sarah! Sarah, wake up! She shot up in bed, her eyes wide with panic. What? What's happening? Get up. Get Emily and get out. We have to go. Now. I was yelling now, but I could barely hear myself over the roaring sound of the fire that was quickly devouring everything. Sarah didn't hesitate. She jumped out of bed and ran to Emily's room, pulling her out of bed. Emily was groggy, confused, but she didn't ask any questions. She just followed us, eyes wide, her little hand clutching mine like a lifeline. Mike, what's going on? Sarah asked, her voice shaking. She was still trying to process it, but I couldn't explain. I didn't have the words. I was too busy trying to get my family out of the house before it burned to the ground. We made it downstairs, but by then the smoke was everywhere. It was so thick I could barely see. I grabbed the keys, my hands slick with sweat, fumbling to unlock the door. Come on! Come on! I screamed, pushing Sarah and Emily ahead of me, trying to get them out of the house as fast as I could. I could hear the fire now. It wasn't just a crackle. It was a roar, like an animal coming for us. I could feel the heat on my skin as we rushed out into the yard. The fire was everywhere now. The trees were burning, the grass crackling beneath our feet. The whole world was ablaze. I looked back at the house, my heart sinking. It was already too late. The flames were crawling up the walls, licking at the roof. My home, everything we had worked for, everything we had built, was gone. I grabbed Sarah's hand, pulling her away from the house. Come on, get to the car. But the car, our only escape, wasn't going to get us very far. The road was blocked. Cars were backed up, people were screaming, running in every direction. It was chaos. No one knew where to go. No one knew what to do. We kept running, but the fire was faster. I could feel the heat on my back, the smoke stinging my eyes. My legs were starting to feel like jelly, but I couldn't stop. Not now. Not when I had my family with me. I don't know how long we ran, but eventually we found an alleyway, a small path that led away from the flames. We just kept moving, not looking back. I didn't want to look back. Every step we took felt like it was the last one we had. Eventually we reached a clearing, and I collapsed, gasping for air. We were safe, for the moment, but everything was different now. The fire wasn't just a random act of nature. It was something bigger, something we couldn't control. It had come for us, and there was no stopping it. I looked at Sarah, and I saw the fear in her eyes. She didn't have to say anything. We both knew nothing would ever be the same again. And then in the distance I saw them again, the lights. Bright beams like lasers, cutting through the smoke, shining down from the sky. But this time they were different. They were closer. They were watching us. I don't know what they were or what they wanted, but I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. And it wasn't just a fire. We were caught in something far bigger. And I couldn't shake the feeling that it was only just beginning. The moment we stepped out into the street, it was like we'd been thrown into another world. A world on fire. The air was thick with smoke. It hit me in the face like a punch, hot and acrid, burning my lungs. I could barely see through it, but I could hear the chaos around me, screams, sirens, the roar of the flames eating everything in their path. People were running in every direction, frantically looking for escape, their faces twisted with fear and disbelief. I'd never seen anything like it, and I couldn't wrap my mind around the fact that it was happening right here, right now. To us. I grabbed Sarah's hand, pulling her and Emily through the smoke, my eyes stinging. Emily was clutching her stuffed bear to her chest, her little face pale and frightened. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. We all knew the situation was dire. But it wasn't just the fire that had me on edge. It was the feeling that we were running towards something, not away from it. The feeling that this wasn't just some freak accident. No, this was something much bigger. Something we couldn't outrun. We stumbled through the thickening smoke, trying to make our way toward the car, but it was impossible. The road was a mess, filled with cars and people all trying to get away at once. Some people were honking, some were shouting, some were just sitting there frozen, not knowing what to do. It was as if everyone was waiting for the world to tell them what to do next. But the world wasn't answering. The world was burning. I could hear the fire now, not just in the distance, but close, too close. The heat was so intense that I could feel it against my skin, even through the smoke. The houses nearby were already gone, their frames silhouetted against the flames, collapsing in on themselves like paper caught in a match. My home, my life gone. It was all slipping away, and there was nothing I could do about it. Mike, we need to go now. Sarah's voice broke through the chaos. She was pulling at my sleeve, urging me to move faster, but I was frozen. All I could do was stare wide-eyed as the fire consumed everything. It wasn't just a fire anymore. It was an animal, a monster, clawing its way through the neighborhood, relentless and unstoppable. It didn't care about us, about our houses, our memories. All it cared about was destruction. Mike, come on. Sarah's voice snapped me out of my daze. I grabbed Emily's hand, and we started running again, weaving through the chaos, barely able to keep our footing on the uneven ground. People were screaming, calling out to each other, running in every direction, not even sure where they were going. It was every man, woman, and child for themselves now. No time for anything else. I could hear the sirens wailing in the distance, but they weren't getting any closer. The roads were clogged with traffic, and there was no way out. We were trapped. The only choice was to keep moving, to keep running until we found somewhere safe, if there even was such a place anymore. The fire was spreading faster than I could comprehend. It felt like it was everywhere. The smoke burned my eyes, my throat, but I didn't stop. There was no stopping. If we stopped, we were dead. As we rounded a corner, I saw a neighbor, a man who lived just a few houses down, crouching by the side of the road. He looked up at me, his face covered in ash, his eyes wide with terror. "Mike," he yelled, but the sound was muffled by the roar of the fire. "It's spreading. We have to go. Get out of here. It's too late." Too late. It was already too late. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I just kept running, pushing through the crowd, trying to get us further away from the fire, but every step felt like we were running in place. The fire was everywhere, faster than I could run. The smoke was choking me, the heat unbearable. It was like we were being swallowed whole. I kept looking over my shoulder, seeing the flames creeping closer. We were barely out of the danger zone, but the fire was spreading so fast. It was no longer just a fire. It was a force of nature, as if the earth itself was cracking open and swallowing everything whole. It didn't care about what was in its path. It was just consuming, devouring. I couldn't help but think about what I'd seen earlier. Those strange lights in the sky. The beams coming down like lasers, hitting the ground, right before the fire started. My mind kept going back to that moment, that sickening realization that something wasn't right. What if those lights had something to do with this? What if they weren't just a coincidence? What if the fire wasn't an accident? But I couldn't dwell on that now. I couldn't afford to. We had to get out. We had to survive. We finally made it to the edge of town, but the fire was still raging behind us. The lights, those strange beams of light, were still there in the distance, flickering like they were watching us. But the further we ran, the less I could make sense of it all. What were those lights? What did they want? "Mike," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "What's happening? Why is this happening?" "I don't know," I muttered, shaking my head. "I don't know. but we need to keep moving. We were all exhausted, but we didn't stop. Not until we reached a safe place, a place far enough from the fire where we could catch our breath. We found a small community center, the doors wide open, people packed inside, trying to escape the chaos. It was full of people just like us, people who had lost everything in an instant. But as we stood there, trying to catch our breath, I couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was still to come. The fire was still burning, still spreading, and those damn lights, they were still there, flickering in the distance. Watching. I had no answers. No way to explain what was happening. All I knew was that we were caught in something far bigger than a fire. Something we couldn't control. And we were running through hell. We made it to Sarah's cousin's place a few miles outside of town, and at least for the moment, we were safe. There was no more running, no more smoke filling the air. But the silence that hung over us felt worse than the chaos we had just escaped. Safe, yes, but everything we knew was gone. Our house, our belongings, all of it reduced to ashes. The fire wasn't just some freak accident. It was a force of nature that didn't care about us. I didn't know where to begin processing any of it. The smoke still clung to everything. It was in our clothes, our hair, our lungs. I could taste it in the back of my throat, thick and bitter. The worst part was the smell, the lingering reminder of everything we'd lost. It was overwhelming, choking, like the fire hadn't really left. It was still there, hovering in the background, impossible to ignore. Sarah and Emily tried to sleep, but I couldn't. I couldn't settle my mind. I kept replaying the events of the night in my head, trying to make sense of it. The lights, the beams from the sky, the fire spreading faster than anything I had ever seen. The way the flames seemed almost too perfect, as if they were controlled. Too controlled. I started to question everything. Was it really lasers from the sky? I kept asking myself that, like I could talk myself out of what I had seen. But the memory was too vivid. Those beams, so precise. They had to be real, right? My head spun with the possibilities. A freak accident? Some kind of natural disaster? Or was it something more, something engineered? Sarah was trying to distract herself by calling family, checking in with people she hadn't heard from. But I could see the unease in her eyes. She didn't talk about it, but I could feel it. The questions, the disbelief. Neither of us had any answers. We were survivors, sure, but at what cost? The next day, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know more. I couldn't just sit there and do nothing. I grabbed my phone and started digging into the fire's origins. There had to be something, anything, to explain how it had started. Maybe I could find out why the fire had spread so damn fast. Maybe there was a simple explanation. But as I dug deeper, the more unsettling things became. Reports started coming in about the fire's speed. People were saying it was like nothing they'd ever seen before, faster than any wildfire they had ever encountered. One of the local news reports said that it spread at a rate that defied explanation. I read the article, my fingers shaking as I scrolled through the words. The fire had started in one place, but then it just exploded. No gradual burn. No warning signs. It spread across the entire neighborhood within hours, leaving no time for evacuation, no time for anything. It was like it was being guided, like it had a mind of its own. The more I looked into it, the more I found stories from other places, other fires, where something similar had happened. It wasn't just this fire. It was happening all over, at different times, in different places. There were reports of lights in the sky, strange beams coming down just before fires would start. And the fires, always fast, always intense. It was like they were too efficient, too perfect. Like there was an invisible hand, making sure they spread exactly the way they needed to. I couldn't believe what I was reading. It was like I was finding pieces of a puzzle that I didn't know existed. A pattern was emerging, but I couldn't see the full picture. I didn't know what to make of it. I started to feel like I was chasing ghosts, trying to make sense of something bigger than me, something beyond my control. That's when I came across an article about a government experiment. It was buried deep in a local news archive, written a few years ago. It was about a classified program, something to do with advanced weather manipulation. They had been working on technologies to control storms, direct lightning, and create artificial firestorms for years. The article didn't say much. It was vague, all speculation and rumors, but it sent a chill down my spine. What if this was connected? What if those lights I saw weren't some natural phenomenon, but part of something far more sinister? I couldn't stop myself from digging deeper. The more I found, the more I realized how much I didn't know. The more questions I had, and the fewer answers. And the more I looked into the fire's behavior, the more it seemed like it was too perfect, too precise. Fires don't just happen like this. Not without something behind them. The way the fire spread, the way it seemed almost directed. It didn't feel like nature at all. It felt like a test. A controlled burn. Like someone or something was pulling the strings. I thought back to the lights, the way they flashed, the way they seemed to target the ground. Had they triggered the fire? Was it all part of some bigger plan? Was this a freak accident, or was there a purpose behind it? I didn't know. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than anyone was telling us. And the more I uncovered, the more I realized that we were all just pawns in something we couldn't see, something too powerful to stop. As I sat there, staring at my phone, the sense of helplessness crept in. The fire had taken everything from us. And now, it seemed like we were caught in something much larger, something that had been set into motion long before we even realized it. I looked over at Sarah, who was sitting quietly with Emily. They were trying to hold it together, trying to keep their hope alive, but I knew the truth. The fire was just the beginning. Something bigger was coming, and I had no idea how to stop it. The questions kept coming, faster than I could keep up with. Was this really a freak accident, or was there something more? And if there was, what could we do about it? At that moment, I realized I didn't have answers. I didn't have control. But I wasn't going to stop searching. The fire wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. And I was going to find out what it all meant, whether I wanted to or not. The weeks that followed were a blur. We stayed with Sarah's cousin for a while, moving between shelters and temporary housing, just trying to survive. The fire had ripped through the entire neighborhood, leaving nothing behind. People were grieving, others were angry. But no one had answers. There was no closure, not for any of us. I kept searching. I couldn't stop. I scoured every news article, every report, every official statement I could find. But it was like hitting a brick wall. The authorities were tight-lipped about the cause of the fire. There was talk about an unprecedented wildfire or a natural disaster of rare magnitude, but nothing concrete. The fire was deemed accidental, caused by a combination of dry conditions and high winds. They mentioned arson as a possibility, but it felt like they were just saying words to fill the silence. They had no real answers. No one did. The lights, the beams I had seen in the sky, were dismissed as unexplained phenomena. Scientists couldn't explain them, so they just swept them under the rug, calling them anomalies in the weather. It was almost like they didn't want to acknowledge them at all. Like the lights were an inconvenient detail in a story they didn't want to tell. I couldn't accept that. I couldn't just let it go. I started digging deeper into the so-called unexplained phenomena. I found reports from other parts of the country, other parts of the world, where people had seen the same lights, beams from the sky, bright and precise, coming down just before strange fires broke out. There was no solid evidence, just scattered stories, rumors, and strange coincidences. I couldn't tie it all together, but the pieces were there. They didn't fit perfectly, but they didn't belong in the world of accidents either. I spoke to other survivors from the fire. Some were just as confused as I was. Some were angry, refusing to believe it was just a freak accident. There were whispers of conspiracy theories, of secret government experiments, of something bigger at play. But the more I listened, the more it became clear, no one knew anything for sure. We were all just grasping at shadows, trying to make sense of something that had no explanation. And maybe that was the hardest part. Not the fire itself, not the destruction, not the chaos of trying to escape. It was the feeling that we would never truly know the truth. That there would be no closure, no answers. We were left with nothing but our memories and a deep sense of confusion. I spent nights staring at the sky, waiting for the lights to come back. Hoping they would. I don't know why. Maybe I thought they'd show me something. Maybe I wanted to understand. But they never came back, not in the same way. There were other strange phenomena, other unexplained lights in the sky, but nothing like that night. Nothing as intense, nothing that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Maybe I had just imagined it. Maybe my mind had tricked me. But then I would remember. I would remember the fire. The way it spread so fast. The way it felt like it was following us, hunting us down. I couldn't forget that. Sarah asked me one night, sitting in the dark of our small temporary apartment, "Mike, do you think it was the lights? Do you think they caused the fire?" I didn't know how to answer her. I didn't know what I believed anymore. Maybe it was a freak accident. Maybe it was some kind of government experiment gone wrong. Maybe it was aliens, or something else entirely. There were too many possibilities, too many unanswered questions. I couldn't make sense of it all. "I don't know, Sarah," I said, my voice heavy. "I don't know." I realized then that I would probably never know the full truth. The authorities weren't going to give us answers. No one would. The lights would remain unexplained. The fire would remain a mystery. And we would be left with the aftermath, picking up the pieces of our lives, trying to rebuild, trying to move on. But it wasn't easy. We couldn't just forget what happened. The fire changed everything. It changed the way I looked at the world. It changed the way I looked at the sky. It made me question everything, every little thing I thought I knew. And I couldn't shake that feeling, that strange, heavy feeling, that something else was out there, something bigger than us, something we couldn't even begin to understand. In the end, I realized that maybe that was the truth. Maybe there was no simple answer. Maybe there was no neat resolution. Maybe some things were just meant to stay mysteries, things we weren't supposed to understand. But that didn't mean I was done searching. The fire may have taken everything we had, but it hadn't taken away my need for answers. It hadn't taken away my drive to keep looking, to keep questioning, even when there were no answers to be found. As I sat outside one night, looking at the stars, I couldn't help but wonder, was it aliens? A government experiment? Or something else entirely? I didn't have a clue, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever it wasn't over. Not for me. Not for any of us. The strange lights, those beams from the sky, they were a reminder. A reminder that we don't know everything. That the world is bigger, stranger, and far more complex than we can ever understand. And maybe that's the way it's meant to be. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know this: the fire changed us. It took everything we had, but it also opened our eyes. And no matter what the truth is, I'll never forget those lights, flickering in the sky, just before everything fell apart. Maybe that's the most haunting part of it all. The not knowing.